And so begins another edition of the Coaching Hour podcast, brought to you in proud partnership with Coaches Network South Africa. Hello, a very warm welcome. I'm Paul Rotherham. I'm joined today by Mareka and our guest, who you'll be meeting in just a moment. Mary not feeling very well today, unfortunately. Feel better soon, Mary, and we do hope to have you back. She's the third spoke of our three-spoked wheel, so it's never nice when she isn't here. Mary, hopefully, will be joining us again for the next edition of the Coaching Hour. Fabulous to have you here. Remember, we would love to see your comments in the comments section, obviously. If you have any questions, if you'd like to offer any insights, particularly for our guest who's joining us today. Is there a doctor in the house? The answer to that question is yes. Mareka, who are we chatting with today?
Right, thank you, Paul. Yes, we have Dr. Chris Lombard with us as our guest today. He is the founder of People Capacity Solutions. He is a performance improvement consultant with more than 29 years, and he's also the author of soon-to-be released book, Resilience is a Choice, which is our topic for today. But before we get into that topic, I've been working with Chris for quite some time, quite a few years. So just for everybody that's listening and watching today, where did your passion for resilience come from?
Well, good morning to everyone. So Mareka, unfortunately, my passion for resilience started with a personal experience. And that experience was being diagnosed with cancer in 1997. So, yeah, at that stage, my business was just over a year old, and my firstborn was very, very young still at the time. Yes, and after that first chemotherapy session, I actually went back to the hospital the next day to the oncology department, and I wanted to tell the oncologist that I'm quitting. I'm not going to continue with this because it was really, really tough. So anyway, so when I got there, there were school children sitting outside oncology and taking chemo before school, like breakfast. And I realized that the difference between them and me was that they made a choice, and that choice was to fight back, kind of thing. So I turned around, tail between the legs, and walked back to my car, and I realized that that old saying that says the only way out is through has just become reality for me. So you've experienced a lot of tough times, up until that stage, but that was the one that almost broke the camel's back for me. So the interest started there, and also then I did a bit of research on, how to deal with situations like that. And so therefore you refer to the book just now. It's not an academic book as such, but based on the personal experience, and that you have to make a choice.
And Chris, do you have a clean bill of health now, may I ask?
Yeah, I'm very grateful to God for that. So interesting thing, Paul, is that when you are diagnosed with cancer, it's like that worst form of rejection. You can't even get life insurance. So normally, these financial advisors are all over you until you say, or they ask you, have you been diagnosed with cancer? And you say yes, then no one seems interested to insure you. So first they said 4 years and then 12 years. But yeah, luckily, the good Lord had other plans. So yeah, so now 27 years later, I'm still around and I'm grateful.
Fantastic.
So, Chris, you do a lot of corporate consulting. What have you noticed, as a trend in the last couple of years, maybe even since COVID, in terms of resilience, your experience?
Yeah, Breaker, we've actually been saying to organizations that you cannot have a resilient organization without having resilient people, because organizations don't change, the people change, and then they change the organization. So your starting point or point of departure then for having a resilient business is to have resilient people. Because systems you can switch on and off, you can replace it, etc. And but people are not similar commodities like that. So we've always been, let's call it, preaching that or advising businesses to invest in their people. And then COVID struck. And you know what? Suddenly, a thought leader from Harvard Business School, a lady by the name of Rosabeth Moskanter, she made a statement and she said, uncertainty is the new normal and resilience is the new critical skill. And suddenly, when somebody of that, nature or importance and representing a body of knowledge like Harvard, when somebody says it, then suddenly it becomes the flavor of the month. So I think organizations also realize that, shucks, we don't have to wait for another pandemic to invest in our people. Yeah, but there's a lot of interesting trends that have followed subsequent to that.
Chris, I'm sorry to ask, could you just repeat the first word? In your quote there, literally, as you said that first word, for me on this end, you disappeared. It was something is the new normal. Just repeat that for me.
Paul, she said uncertainty is the new normal and resilience is the new critical skill.
Okay, uncertainty is the new normal.
Yes,
Yeah.
certainty is
Uh,
the new normal. And if you just think about it, Paul, organizations. So apart from what Marika said in the introduction, is that organizations consistently go through change, and we support organizations to be successful in change. And I get so angry, that's the lightest word I can use, that leadership in organizations, it seems like they don't really care about how they make their people feel. So, in successful change, there's a super important principle, and that principle suggests that you only communicate what you know and what you understand, but then you have to create certainty as soon as possible. Because what people have to endure and suffer in silence, I think it's really, really unfair towards employees, but also their families.
do
So
you
yeah,
think we're living
uncertainty.
in times now that are way more uncertain than they have ever been? And if so, why do you think that, Doctor?
I think that we definitely live in more uncertain times. If you think about our country and the changes that we are going through, people are not sure, whether they will still have a job tomorrow. So not only is the political arena not really conducive for people being, let's say, positive and be creating certainty, but also technology brings a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if you've noted or heard that just yesterday, one of the leading banks, I think in Hong Kong, announced that it's going to lay off a significant number of people because AI would be replacing them. So, yeah, so that's a real scare that people feel that they might be replaced by technology. But I can just, for the listeners out there, say that in the changes that we have been involved in that were systems related, it actually created more employment than
Hmm.
it than causing job loss. So that is also a bit of a fallacy. So that's a choice I think that that particular bank made. So yeah, so just as an example.
So there is some hope. Do you
There's a
think, I'm sure you rub shoulders with a lot of movers and shakers in the international arena. We're very good at looking at our own back garden and criticizing and seeing how many weeds there are. Do you think it's the same internationally, albeit it's a different set of problems? Are people who you know in the international space just as uncertain, dealing with just as many frustrations and challenges? Or are we really in a third world country?
Well, there's two questions. And the first one is that I think it's pretty much more of the same. I remember in my exposure in working with first world countries, and in those countries, I've noted that they are more, open to change. And then if you think about the most used change model in the world, that of John Kotter. Kotter realized that his own model is kind of flawed, if I can say it like that, because he realized that a tell and do approach to change does not work. But where did he discover that? He discovered that in South Africa. So Paul, the answer is that across the world, there's a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty, and you can just think about, the political changes that happened in a country like America and the ripple it has. And then if somebody sneezes in China, it affects us in South Africa and particularly in Africa because of decisions that politicians make. So the citizens of countries are basically the people that how can I say, suffer because of decisions that others make. And then the second part that I want to say is that I'm very proud for you to say to you today that us as South Africans, we are a really resilient nation. If I compare how we cope with change compared to how people cope with change in first world countries, it's like chalk and cheese. So I think that we can be very proud of that, Paul. But on the other hand, I also want to communicate my concern is that we can become so at ease with change that we almost accept things that shouldn't be, that particular way. But I think let's take the positive from it. So yes, it's a global phenomenon, not only local.
What I've realized last year is I did quite a lot of stress management, burnout prevention workshops and things like that. Um, Quite a lot, especially last year. So what is your opinion in terms of the resilience? Because it's almost like, for me, it's like a band-aid. We have to put something on it and give them a workshop on how to manage stress. But what has that got to do with, or how does that link with organizations' resilience?
Sure, Marika. So once again, if we can take it to individual level, and for you that have done a lot of workshops on stress and burnout and things like that. So um, in my book and also in the sessions that we do at organizations, we actually start a step earlier. So I'm just sharing my opinion and experience. And my opinion is that stress is not the problem. The problem starts a step earlier. And that the problem starts with the inability to deal with pressure. Because a simplistic definition of stress is actually the natural response of the body to pressure. So, in other words, the foundation of resilience is for people to embark on active approaches to cope with pressure. Because I think if the listeners just go and spend a few minutes to think about all the different pressures that they have to deal with in the various roles that they perform, life and work, but then also that pressure from the self, which is a silent little, very very strong performer and one that arm wrestles you into a state of submission from time to time. But if we think about how much pressure we really, really cope with, and then sometimes that one little thing happens and that pushes you over the edge. And that's why when I refer to resilience, the analogy that I like to use is a bungee jump. So when that one little pressure, when you are now rushing and you have to take the kids to school, you still have to get to work, knowing that with load shedding, the traffic lights are out, etc., etc. And when you get to your car, you've got a flat tire. And right there, that's where the ball hits the fan, kind of thing. And that's where you need to really, really, make sure that your bungee rope is intact because you're going to be in midair and not feel in control. So if I may, Marika, highlight, why do I highlight or why do I use resilience and compare that to a bungee jump? Because without making it sound academic and rather make it sound practical for everyone, is that resilience is not only a factor of your own willingness and ability to get up and try again. I read the other day, so I don't want to steal somebody else's line of thought here. The person said that it's not about bouncing back, it's actually about bouncing forward. Because if you think about bouncing back and you listen to that word, it's not necessarily progress. But if you bounce, at least, try to move forward and make progress in the process. So just to highlight that again, resilience is a factor of two things: your own willingness and ability to try again or to fight back. But then the one that I think research has really let us down, and that second one, and this might be, I would say, a bit of a wake-up call for some of the listeners, is that resilience is also about your perception of your support structure. So think about that. If you are at work, for example, and you have to really go through a tough time and you have to achieve all your objectives, etc., but you never feel like your rope, your bungee rope is secure with your manager. Do you agree with me that that causes uncertainty?
Mm.
Yeah. And what happens when there's that uncertainty in the brain? The uncertainty creates a void, a gap that's normally filled with one of two things. So it's either fear or irrational beliefs. So as I would also sometimes refer to it as a master's degree, an MSU in making stuff up. So now I make stuff up, but that's my reality. So therefore, I would say to people, if you really want to start working on your resilience, make sure and think about the critical relationships that you have, life and work. Go and secure your rope, with that individual. So it's almost like if you bungee jump, you can have the strongest rope in the world, you know, but if that rope is not secured to the platform, you're really going to fall yourself into a Bushman sketch, and that's not really going to be, helpful to anyone. So you cannot only consider whether the rope is secure to you. That's your own willingness and ability. You also have to secure your rope with your support structure. And therefore, some people might say, but it's not my place, it's not my job. You have to prioritize and say, make that your concern, because have the crucial conversation with that person, whether that's at home, if somebody feels like I've had a long day, now I've got all the chores and responsibilities of a mum at home as well, then get the husband to or the partner then to get off the couch and leave the remote control and come and do your thing. Do perform your role as well, because we said I do for better or for worse, not only I do choose to lie on the couch and take control of the remote. So yeah, I would say that that second part is often overlooked.
We're living in an interesting age, Doctor, because I have a daughter who's 18, turning 19 this coming month, and she recently started work. And it's so interesting to see the dynamic because outside of the workspace, she's this little rocket. She's like most people of her age, where to some extent there's some entitlement. There's the fact that the world kind of owes her, and she's got it all together and she knows everything. And I guess typical teenage behavior, we were probably the same. Yet, in the work environment, she's been dealing with a few issues being new at work in terms of not being certain how to do things and should she speak to the boss. And there's this almost a fear of being able to bridge that gap between her as a new staff member and the owner of this company. And it's a very small business. It's a little Italian restaurant where she's working. My
Yeah.
point is, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect here because we're living in an age where we think that these youngsters, with all of their energy and their social media skills and what have you, that they can go out and grab everything in the world. Yet, I think many of them are far more reactive than they are proactive. So to me, there's this big hole, this void, where we need to be teaching people how to have respectful conversations to, inverted commas, get what you want. And I'm not saying that you are entitled and that the world owes you everything, but in a relationship, and I think this is what I was hearing you say, in a relationship, if that bungee rope is going to be secure, you need to be the one, even if you are the employee, not the employer, you need to be the one to actually have the confidence and do it respectfully to have these conversations with your superior, with your management, with your boss, with the owner of the business, whoever it might be, to facilitate these connections. Where I'm finding a lot of the youngsters, and maybe it's happening with our sort of generation as well, they don't have that skill set. They'll come home and complain about how difficult things are at work and how their boss doesn't speak to them nicely and they feel under pressure. But they never have those conversations at the office with the people who can actually make a difference.
Yes, Paul. I think that you using an example that kind of hits the nail on the head. is that if I can just take you back to COVID, since Marika reminded us of that a little bit earlier, the generation that struggled most in COVID was, let's call it Generation Z. I think we're running a bit out of alphabet now because it looks like now they're starting with A again. But the younger generation suffered most in COVID. And the very interesting finding was, why? Because there wasn't an app or a quick fix. It's nothing that could predict that COVID is over. And suddenly, they were all stuck with social media, and conversations happened on phones or devices and things like that. And they were stuck in their homes. So why am I using that example, Paul? Is because, number one, the reason why people struggle to be resilient, the first reason is the inability to prioritize. So they can't make the choice. So I'm back to resilience is a choice. They forget to make the choice that I need to ask for help, because it seems like the thing that is our lowest priority is self-care. And in this case, I think you'll agree with me that if I don't know how to do something, but I do not prioritize to ask for assistance, I'm not only I'm not taking care of myself because I'm the cause of my own uncertainty. And secondly, it's almost like they expect people to mind read and say, look, this youngster needs help. So there's a huge desire in South Africa with our youth, is they have a huge desire for mentorship and for good leadership. And I think that's missing. There's a lot of fatherless homes, but in the workplace, there's also a lot of managers, but a real absence of true leaders. So therefore, if you want to succeed, you have to prioritize and go and ask for help. But what prevents me from asking for help is that the things I make up. There's that master's degree again. And then the second thing is the ego is telling them, if you ask for help, you are weak. It takes a real man and a woman to say, look, I need help. So rather ask, but now only if they get to the point where they get a verbal warning. Now suddenly they want to ask for help. So what's the worst thing that can happen? The person can say, look, I'm not interested in helping you, but then at least your rope is not secure. And then I have to change the line of the conversation, Paul. So there's the two things. They look for quick fixes. They expect others to mind read that they need help. And because they don't prioritize. But yeah, I should say that we should cast the net a little bit wider than just the youth. I think the uncertainty related to, and I don't want to touch on an unnecessary nerve here, but I'm just going to say it as it is that the uncertainty caused by labor legislation, for example, and legislation generally in South Africa, people are scared to ask for help because they think I might be perceived as incompetent or not yet competent, and then I could lose my job, So, yeah, so that's why leadership really needs to step up. And then sadly, again, if we take it back to COVID, the level in organizations that struggled most was management, because they got pressure from the top, pressure from the bottom, pressure from customers, and they felt like the hamburger patty getting pressure from everywhere kind of thing. And therefore, my biggest concern in terms of a lack of resilience, I just think back of a work session we had last week, and the managers, you can see they're really struggling, and it's only February. It's only February, yeah. So I think everybody needs to go and have that conversation, and listen to their emotions, Paul.
It's quite frightening, isn't it? That around COVID, I think most of us thought, sure, now this is really the worst of it. We're in the thick of things, that this is bad. Little did we know that we were only really going to see the full effects 4, 5, 6 years down the line. And I'm sure this could continue for another 4, 5, 6 years.
It could, yeah. And sad reality for me, Paul, is that a lot of companies actually laid off people during COVID. It would be interesting to do research to determine how many of those companies actually re-employed people. Because now they realized in COVID, people were desperate to keep their job, to provide for their families, etc. And therefore they stepped up and they showed interest and commitment to the organization. And suddenly, now, how many years later, those vacancies or those people were not reappointed. So you'll find that a lot of people, if we thought that pre-COVID, where people said people are expected to do more with less, if we thought it was relevant then, I think we need to revisit it today and ask ourselves, now people are expected to do more with less, but it's like times or to the power of 2 or 3 or whatever. So yeah, the hockey stick, it's exponentially, the pressure has just increased. So back to my comment to Marika a little bit earlier, the pressure is just mounting, and yeah.
Do you think, Doctor, if I may ask for your professional opinion and perhaps sticking your neck out to some extent, do you think right now that employees are under unrealistic pressure and almost unreasonable demands on the whole? Do you think that we are being put into positions that really are almost exploitive in nature?
Well, if we have to make a general statement, and I take responsibility for my own view in this case, I think if we look at the general picture, then the answer is yes. Interesting that a number of years already, a guy by the name of Peter Drucker, I'm talking like I know him personally and I don't, Peter Drucker said that companies that focus on profit only won't be in business for long. And some people frowned upon the statement. But what makes you sustainable is actually the people kind of thing. And you cannot continuously prioritize profit over people. And that is a bit of a concern for me, Paul. And then, yeah, so in the private sector, I would say, because public sector, what really concerns me, and I can say to you that we have had exposure now to dealing with senior management in that sector, is that it is frightening to see that some of them are really, really not up to, up to scratch in terms of being able to deliver in terms of what's required in their roles. And here I'm not only referring to competence for those that immediately, frowned upon that. I'm referring to the fact that today X is in charge. Tomorrow is a new mayor. I think about Ekurhuleni in this case. There's a new mayor. Then there's new policies and decisions and things like that. So those poor people in our local government, for example, they must be suffering in silence. And now there's legislation where managers are held accountable for performance. But the changes just keep on happening at the top, and they have to keep up. And that, in my opinion, is unrealistic.
Yeah. It sounds like I shouldn't be alone in feeling as if I'm working 3 or 4 times harder now than I was 15 years ago, and yet I'm still not able to swim across this lake that's in front of me.
Yeah, so you thought you were putting on flippers, and actually the flippers were made out of cement. So you're kicking, but you feel like you are sinking. Yeah. Good luck with that.
To summarize our conversation, and my final question is, why would you say in today, 2025, is resilience a critical skill? It's not a nice to have.
Well, Marika, I think the first reason for me is that if we think about the workplace as such, it's sad to see that people almost became a commodity. So you can be a phenomenal employee, and then if your resilience is not intact, what's going to be affected? Your health. And the most important one for me is your mental health, because all health starts with mental health.
Yes.
And now a person doesn't, or they cannot rather, let me use that word, they cannot perform according to their potential. And that can affect their job security, but it can also affect their personal lives as such. And if people are not resilient, they're not going to prioritize self-care, Marika. So for us to, to keep our head above water, nobody else is going to do it for us. So we have to be resilient to be able to deal with these situations. So, and therefore, I would say that people need to invest in themselves because employers are unlikely to do that. So therefore, start with yourself so that you can deal with these challenges. So that would be my primary reasons because you are the most important person. And maybe you just sometimes appear like an expense to a company, etc. And when that excellent employee leaves, 2 weeks later, you are replaced. And then the new one comes in. And I think people should be more valuable than that, Marika.
And
You almost need to be selfish.
yes.
I think we should be selfish, Paul, in terms of prioritizing self-care, and not tolerate certain things. But I'm not saying be entitled. I would say let's replace that word entitlement with being responsibly assertive. So, where you realize that if you're not going to say no, and then the most critical thing I want to highlight, I know that we've run out of time now, Marika, but maybe for a topic for another day, is the significance of recharging your batteries, if I can use that simplistic term. Now, there's a big word for that, and that's called effort recovery. So if you run out of petrol, then that's what's going to happen. You're going to stop. So we don't prioritize the fact that we must make time for ourselves to recharge our batteries. So you cannot give if your cup is half full. I get irritated with this notion of is the glass half full or half empty? Shucks, man. If it's half full, you have to shake it to give. You have to spill in order to give. And that's what I'm experiencing every day. People are being shaken and they must spill in order to give. So your cup needs to overflow. And you need to get yourself to that point where you can give more of yourself. Why? Because my cup is full. And that full cup is not only your bank account cup, it's the personal cup. Yeah.
Sure.
So before
What a
we,
lovely interview, huh?
yeah,
I've
very.
really enjoyed this, Chris. I must say it's taken a completely different route to what I was expecting. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. It was pleasant to have the conversation with you as well. You unfortunately asked all the difficult questions, and I hope I passed the test.
You were going
Yes.
to say, Mareka?
Before we wrap up, so your book is launching. Do you know when more or less we can expect the book?
Shucks, Marika. So the timelines change consistently, but it's an advanced stage now. So I was actually hoping for the end of Feb, but yeah, I think it more realistic now is mid-March.
I really think it's
Wonderful.
a book to look forward to because, as I know, Chris is very practical. So I'm sure if you read the book, Resilience is a Choice, there will definitely be some practical activities and strategies that you can apply to become more resilient. So I think it's going to be very
Definitely.
valuable.
Yeah, definitely. So the purpose of the book is that every person should be able to, once they finish reading it,
Mm.
to actually draft their own plan. Because remember, I can't be resilient like you are. I
Yeah.
can only be resilient within my own capacity, and that is the key. Yeah. But thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Doctor. I have to just throw this in as a parting shot. I don't know whether you ever remember a chap on the radio many years ago. I think he's passed away now. Professor Harry Seftel. Do you
Yeah,
remember that name?
yeah. But I think he was on Radio 2000 giving medical advice, and
Correct, correct.
yeah,
He was on
yeah,
702 and a couple of other
yeah,
stations over the years. I remember growing up listening to him, and I just want to say how much you remind me of him. I don't know if there's any archive material out there, if there's anything on YouTube or any of these other audio platforms, but if you do a search for Harry Seftel, I'm not entirely sure how you would spell his surname, and I do recall he was a professor. but have a listen to how he speaks. And it's weird, throughout this entire podcast, I've just had Professor Harry Seftel in my mind, and it's actually wonderful to pick up the similarities. You both sound, albeit he's now, I don't think, with us anymore, extremely knowledgeable. You've got all the facts up here, and you've got the answers to all the questions, and it's very seldom that one encounters that these days. So it's actually really lovely to chat with an academic. So thank you.
I'm not an academic. I'm a professor of practice. So therefore, I only teach the MBA students what happens in practice. So I'm not an academic, Paul.
Well, you speak as if you are, and it's as I say, to me, it's very refreshing. I'm sure Marika and our audience feels the same.
Thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it.
Lastly, we've spoken about your book, but how can we connect with you, Chris? If anybody would like to perhaps book a session, find out more about your corporate work and your training and the good things that you do, what's the best way of reaching you?
Well, they can look at the website or they can just send an email. So I don't know if I'm allowed to share that on air, or Marika can perhaps share that on your platform or things like that. So the company is People Capacity, or www.peoplecapacity.co.za, or from a change perspective, Change Capacity. And then the email address is just me, Chris, at People Capacity or Change Capacity, if they want to make contact. Yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah, shout it from the rooftops. You've given us your time, and the very least we can do is help you to grow in your space. So thank you very much. That's peoplecapacity.co.za, hey?
That's correct, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's where we'll leave it for today, Marika, unless there's anything else you'd like to throw into the hat. No. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Marika. Mary, feel better. And thank you, of course, to you, because if you weren't here listening to this or watching this, then none of this would be worthwhile. So thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to your company on the next edition of the Coaching Hour. Cheers for now.